Thank you all for joining us today. I really appreciate you joining in on this webinar. For most of you, you've done this monitoring before, so a lot of it will be review. We did add one component of the monitoring program for this year, so we're going to talk about that at length. This presentation should be about...
a text.
Okay, for most of you, this will be review, but a couple of housekeeping items just to get started. If you can't hear or if you're getting some feedback, please let us know in the chat, and go ahead and mute your phone. We have a lot of participants on the call right now, and it's just easier to have everybody muted so Greg and I can host the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, so please don't pause it. And we are recording it right now, so this will be available on Oregon Health Authority's website, and we'll also send out a copy of the webinar to all of the participants. So the outline for today, first I'm going to talk a little bit about what cyanobacteria are in general, what harmful algal blooms are, and why we're doing this monitoring for toxins. Then we're going to switch over to Greg, who's going to talk more about the Oregon Administrative Rule, which is why you're all monitoring. And then I'm going to talk about how last season went and some of the results that we had. And then we're going to move ahead to this year and go step by step how the monitoring and sampling process works. We'll also talk about updates to this year. Specifically, we're adding this early warning monitoring program. And again, if anybody on the line is not muted, please mute your phone. All right, so to get started here, we're monitoring for cyanobacteria. And cyanobacteria are also called blue-green algae. You might know them as cyanohabs or just habs. But we're specifically talking about a type of bacteria that is able to photosynthesize. They're naturally occurring anywhere where there's water, even the world's driest deserts. Some species in particular are able to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, so even in areas where there's low nitrogen in the water, they're still able to persist and they actually grow very well. Some species, including those that can fix nitrogen, can also make toxins. And these species don't necessarily always make toxins, but there are certain switches that will allow them to become harmful. And it's important to know that although we're interested in cyanobacteria specifically, not all harmful algal blooms are cyanobacteria. You may be familiar with red tide, which is another type of algae that produces harmful algal blooms. In freshwater, we're specifically interested in cyanohabs or cyanobacteria harmfall algal blooms because those are the most common. And I mentioned a minute ago that not all cyanobacteria are able to produce toxins, and those that are don't always produce toxins. They prefer to grow under certain conditions, which turns this switch on to produce toxins, which include warm, sunny weather, usually shallow and slow-moving water, and high nutrients. Just like land plants, harmful algal blooms love a lot of fertilizer, helps them grow. And when invasive species are in water bodies, they tend to outcompete native species, reducing the competition and allowing more light into the water body, which allows these algae to grow and form large blooms. And again, these toxins aren't necessarily present when the algae bloom, and vice versa. So these toxins are released when the algae cells burst and when they die. So these toxins can persist long after the algae have disappeared. Likewise, you may not see a bloom right away. So it's important that we monitor not just visually, but also test for toxins. These toxins are considered harmful because they affect all parts of your body, the skin, the liver, kidneys, your nervous system. So it's important that we monitor. So Greg, I'm going to switch it over to you and have you talk about this rule and why we're doing this monitoring in the first place.
Thanks, Allison. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here today. I'm Greg Baird. I'm the Emerging Contaminant Specialist with the Drinking Water Program. And, right, so this monitoring, this rule falls under Oregon Administrative Rule 333-061-0510 and was adopted permanently in 2019. The rule is part of the drinking water rules in Oregon. So if you have questions about the rule requirements or resources that are available, you can contact me. The DEQ lab's role is to facilitate the analysis of the samples. So questions about logistics around sampling can go to Allison. So just a little bit of history about HABs monitoring in Oregon. We had a voluntary monitoring program started around 2008. If we identified a recreational harmful algal bloom in a drinking water source, we asked water systems to test. In 2011 or so, we got some funding where we were able to actually pay for the testing, so we're happy about that. We got a little bit more participation at that point. And then in the summer of 2018, let's see, just a second. Okay. In the summer of 2018, we had the situation in Salem where toxins were detected in the finished water, and that's when we adopted a temporary rule that required cyanotoxins monitoring for water systems that were determined to have a susceptible source. And as I said before, those rules were made permanent in 2019, and that's where we're at now. So these are what the actual health advisory levels are. We're monitoring for 2 cyanotoxins, microsystems, and cylindrospermopsin. Each toxin has 2 health advisory levels, a lower level for that only affects vulnerable populations, and a higher level that affects everybody. So we got these levels from the EPA. These are EPA's health advisory levels, but we have adopted those into our rules, so they are regulatory levels and enforceable levels in Oregon, but not nationally, just in Oregon. So it is required to monitor. Not all public water systems that use surface water have to monitor. Only those that use surface water that have sources that are deemed susceptible to cyanobacteria. Basically, there's 3 criteria for getting onto the susceptible list. The main one that most water systems are on the list for is a previously documented harmful algal bloom or a cyanotoxins detection in the source. The other main criteria is the source is on the DEQ's Integrated Report and Clean Water Act Section 303D list for limiting factors for algae and aquatic weeds. Sampling locations. So primarily, the main sampling location is either the source or the common header. Systems that only have one surface water source would collect their raw samples from that source prior to any treatment. Systems that have multiple sources that come together, that combine before treatment, would sample the raw sample at that combined header, that combined sample point. In the event that there are toxins detected in the raw water, finished water sampling would occur at the entry point. So that's fully treated water at or before the first customer. And then in the event that an advisory had to be issued, distribution sampling would be required at representative locations in order to lift the advisory. One note about if your source is a Goody well, a groundwater under direct influence well, you should be sampling from the well prior to any treatment or filtration, unless you get bank filtration credit. So the routine monitoring requirements for everyone are raw water sampling every 2 weeks between May and October. This is the monitoring that's required by the rule to occur annually, so it's ongoing every year. If there is a detection in the raw water of 0.3 micrograms per liter for either cyanotoxin, sampling changes to weekly at both the raw and the finished water entry point. If toxins are detected at the entry point, sampling changes to daily. And if toxins are detected at the entry point over a health advisory level, a confirmation sample has to be collected as soon as possible. If that confirmation sample is also over the health advisory level, an advisory must be issued. Purchasing water systems, so those that buy water don't have their own surface water source. They don't have any routine sampling requirements. They only have to sample in the distribution in order to lift an advisory if one has been issued. And there's some notification requirements that the seller has to notify the purchaser within a certain amount of time if finished water samples are over the health advisory level. This is difficult to see, I'm sure, but I wanted to point this out. This is sort of a handy-dandy flow chart that summarizes the monitoring requirements, and it's on our website, which I will give you the address for in a second, but I recommend printing this out and having it handy in case you need it. So public notification and advisories. If entry point water has toxins over the health advisory level, there's a requirement to notify any purchasers. I should say that if this is confirmed over the health advisory level, the advisory has to be issued and the purchasers have to be notified, and a press release has to go out. Other reporting requirements are finished water detections have to be included in the annual consumer confidence report. And the criteria to lift an advisory is 2 daily finished water samples below the health advisory level and 2 daily distribution samples over the health advisory level, under the health advisory level, excuse me. Reporting, labs must analyze and report results over a health advisory level within 2 business days. Finished water samples over the health advisory level must be reported to OHA and any purchasing systems within 24 hours. Confirmation samples over health advisory levels must be reported to OHA and purchasers within 8 hours. Results used to lift an advisory must be reported to OHA within a business day. All other results must be reported to OHA by the 10th of the following month. Other related monitoring this year, qPCR study. I won't go into that much. Allison's going to talk about that. And voluntary cyanotoxins monitoring program. I just wanted to mention this because we still are providing this voluntary monitoring program that we've always had before we had a rule. So this is for systems with surface water that are not on the susceptible list. If they observe a bloom, they can let me know and we can arrange to have cyanotoxins testing done. Here's the link to the drinking water cyanotoxins webpage, and a couple of resources on there I want to point out are we recently posted FAQs for vulnerable population advisories, all population advisories, and an FAQ for medical providers. So if you are interested, you can check those out if you are trying to do some pre-planning for messaging about what you would do with if you had to issue an advisory. You might be interested in checking these out ahead of time, or your emergency management people might be interested in them. That flow chart that I showed is also on this page. The list of susceptible systems is on this page. And down in the treatment information section, we created a document called Optimizing Toxin Removal, which gives recommendations based on the different kind of surface water treatment that you might have, things that you could do to remove the cells or remove the toxin. So things you can do right now is just be sure you understand what the monitoring requirements are and what would happen if there were some detections. Think about if you had to issue an advisory, what sample sites in the distribution would you sample at that would be representative in order to lift the advisory? Maybe check out that treatment optimization document and see what steps you could take at your particular treatment plant if you had to reduce toxins. Make sure your contact lists for everybody are up to date and know where to find resources. So yes, takeaways, people really want to know what's in their water. Even though there's not a federal regulation, they want to be aware of the safety of their drinking water. So it's important to do the testing. That's the only way that we know that the water's safe. And it's important to communicate those results to the public. Also important to make sure those relationships with other agencies and stakeholders are in place ahead of time. And think about some of the contingency plans that you would have in place if you had to issue an advisory. So with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Allison. Again, if you have questions about the rule requirements or any of the resources on our website, just let me know.
Thanks, Greg. And I realized that I didn't introduce myself at the beginning of the presentation. I'm Allison Minarovic. I'm the Harmful Algal Bloom Monitoring Coordinator at the DEQ Lab. I started at DEQ in November, so this is my first full season with the program. I'd like to start talking about the 2019 season recap by pointing out that we had 57 sites participating for a total of 819 analyzed samples. Included in that number are source water detections at 6 facilities, which resulted in an extra 35 samples for the season. The blooms at these facilities lasted anywhere from 1 to 9 weeks, and there were no detections found in finished water, so nobody needed to monitor daily. The microsystems were detected in source water in systems that draw their water from the Santiam River, North Santiam, and Lake Selmac. So the facilities that draw their water from North Santiam and Santiam experienced a rather predictable bloom between mid-June and end of August. For most of these facilities that did experience a bloom, there was a larger bloom at the beginning of July and then another peak in mid-August. Lake Selmac had a bloom that fluctuated from the end of September until about Thanksgiving. And we had a great full season of monitoring. The majority of the samples that we received were in good order. Just some minor issues with bottles being overfilled, and then some minor issues with labeling bottles and filling out chain of custody forms. Very few of the samples that we received were considered invalid, which are either over temperature, over the holding time, or arriving in broken or leaky bottles. When we did receive invalid samples, facilities were really great about resampling and sending us new samples within a very short time frame. So I'd like to congratulate everybody on a really successful season, and I'm pointing out these issues so that we can improve upon our program for this year. So great job, everybody. So this year, like I mentioned, we're adding one component to the monitoring program. This is called qPCR sampling. For those of you that aren't familiar with qPCR, this is a method to monitor DNA that code for cyanotoxins in the water. And we consider this to be an early warning detection signal. A few studies have come out recently that suggest that this qPCR monitoring method can detect blooms between 1 and 2 weeks before toxins appear. The state of Ohio uses qPCR for some of their monitoring, and we're giving it a test run to see if we can develop a lower cost early warning detection method that will hopefully reduce the number of surprises we see in water and can lead to earlier treatment. So we're trying to make this addition as easy as possible because we don't want folks to have to go out and do additional monitoring. So what this means for you is during 6 of your regularly scheduled source water monitoring collection days, you're going to fill an extra plastic bottle, which you should have received in your kit, for 6 of your sampling days. So these will occur between beginning of June and mid-August. The only catch is that I'm sorry that you will need to fill out a second chain of custody form. That's because these samples end up in different parts of the lab and they need their own separate paperwork. We just want to make this paperwork a little bit difficult for you guys, I guess. So I appreciate your cooperation with this in advance. If you do experience a source water or finished water detection, we ask that you will collect this qPCR sample along with your toxin sample just in your source water. So by now you should have all received your first shipment of kits. You have 8 monitoring kits in a large box. This shipment includes all of the bottles you need for your regularly scheduled qPCR sampling. The highlighted dates indicate the weeks that you're going to be collecting the qPCR samples. Whether you're in Group A or Group B, you should have that monitoring schedule in your box of kits. The bolded dates in your respective columns are holidays. These all happen to fall on Mondays, so just sample the following day on Tuesday. We'll ship out shipment number 2 before mid-August so that you have all of the materials you need ahead of time. This second shipment won't have any plastic bottles for qPCR sampling unless there are toxins detected in source water or finished water. The season is expected to last 26 weeks, beginning this coming Monday. If there are blooms at the end of the season, you will need to go into overtime. So the sampling protocol for toxin monitoring is the same as it has been the last 2 seasons. In all of your kits, in all of your boxes of 8 kits, you will have 8 coolers in cardboard boxes. You should have 4 gel ice packs per cooler. If you have any leaking ice packs or problems with your coolers, please let me know and we can ship out additional coolers in your second shipment early so that you have the materials you need. You'll also have enough amber glass bottles for your source water toxin monitoring. Each of these are pre-labeled with a fill line label, and they have a preservative tablet in them. So they're also contained in bubble wrap bags just to protect them for shipping. I also included 8 lab paperwork packets. They're all in one big bag right now, but each has a separate Ziploc bag, all the bottle labels you need, and they just need to be separated out into individual Ziploc bags once you return the samples. You also have enough prepaid UPS return labels for each of your coolers. Please just make sure that you stick them on the box and drop them off at UPS early enough that they can arrive the following day. Like I mentioned before, your first shipment also has all of the plastic bottles you need for qPCR monitoring. Each of these plastic bottles is in a smaller Ziploc bag. We just need that to be sealed up when you ship the sample back. And you'll have green chain of custody forms for the qPCR samples. If you're missing any items, if you have any issues with the supplies that are in your kits, or if bottles are broken, please let me know. I'll ship out the supplies that you need. So for labeling bottles, like I mentioned, these bottles have the fill line labels attached. You'll also have a sheet of bottle labels that you need to add to the bottle whenever you sample. You'll have either raw water or finished water that you need to check off on your pre-labeled label. Then you also need to write down the sampling point, the date, and time of collection. The sampling point is the sampling ID that's on your chain of custody form. Please make sure that you write it out in full, just legibly, so that we can read that. Last year we had some bottles that were labeled like river or source water or EP. Please just make sure that you fill out the sampling point with the ID that's on your chain of custody. If you have a toxin detection in your water, we'll ask that you sample send us some additional samples. So if you have a toxin detection in your source water, we'll need a confirmation sample, and you will switch to the weekly raw water sampling. We'll send you extra bottles for that. If you have a detection in your entry point, you will switch from weekly sampling to daily. And again, we didn't have any of these instances in 2019, and I'm hoping that will be the case for this year as well. In the event that you have the toxin cylindrospermopsin found in your finished water, we're going to send you these 2 small vials that are pictured at the, on this slide. We haven't had anybody need to send us these samples before. If you need to collect this sample, we'll give you more instructions, but you're just going to fill a small amount of water into these vials. It's about 10 milliliters per vial, and we need those sent back just as soon as possible. So like I mentioned, you have 2 different chain of custodies in your first box of kits. This is the chain of custody for the cyanotoxins. This is the same chain of custody that you've had the last 2 seasons. It should have your facility name, facility ID, address, contact, and phone number. If there are any changes that need to be made to the contact information and you haven't already let me know, please go ahead and make those changes on the chain of custody and shoot me an email letting me know what changes there are to the contact information. When you fill out this chain of custody form, fill out the name or names of the people that are collecting the sample and the sampling agency. Sometimes this is different than the facility itself. Your sampling point ID is listed here on in this table here. Your routine sample will always be source water. We ask that you fill out the sample collection date and time. And if there are any comments that you need to list, I don't have an example off the top of my head, but if there's anything that you need us to know about the sample, just write it in the comments. And then once you drop off, or just before you pack up the sample, sign the relinquished by box, write down the agency or the company that you're from, and the date and time that you're packing up the box. This isn't the same time that you're collecting the sample unless you ship it immediately after collection. Once the chain of custodies are received at the lab, we'll fill out the rest of the form, the receipt by, the gray boxes, all of that. And the qPCR chain of custody will be the green forms that are in your kit. This is pretty much the same chain of custody as your toxin monitoring. You still fill out the same information, the sample collector and agency. Again, if there are changes to the contact information, please let me know. Make those changes on your form and email me. You'll fill out the sample collection date and time as usual. And then once you pack up the sample, you just sign the form just like you would with the toxin COC. Again, I apologize that you need to fill out 2 of these forms, but it really helps us out at the lab. So after you collect your sample, you will place the 4 frozen ice packs in the cooler. Please make sure that you freeze these before you collect the sample. We need to have samples arrive at the lab under 10 degrees Celsius. So if the samples arrive over temperature, you'll need to resample, and we don't want to give you extra work to do. Before you pack up your kit, just go ahead and double check the bottle labels, making sure that both labels are complete and labeled properly. Likewise with the chain of custody forms, make sure that you circle the sample type if it's not just the regular source water sample, and sign and date the form before you put it in the bag and send it off to us. Make sure that your glass bottles are protected in the bubble bags, and please keep the chain of custody forms dry by putting them in the Ziploc bags. There should be extra space in your coolers, and just to make sure that those bottles don't rattle around, please pack the coolers with extra packing material. It can be crumpled paper, paper towels, whatever you have lying around. We would really appreciate it. There is a chance that these bottles could break during shipment, so that packing material really helps us. So the labels are prepaid, so don't worry about having to pay for those. You have enough for each of your coolers so that you only need to use the label once. Please don't photocopy them. They each have unique tracking numbers. We cannot receive samples on Saturdays, Sundays, or holidays. So if a holiday falls on a Monday, go ahead and just sample on Tuesday. And double check the shipping drop-off times at your nearest UPS facility, especially in case there are any changes to UPS drop-off times due to the coronavirus. And we just need to receive the samples the next day in our lab in Hillsborough. So I mentioned before that we received just a few invalid samples. Over 98% of the samples we got at the lab last year were valid and able to be analyzed. But if a sample is invalid, it's because it's either too warm, too old, so received 48 hours or more after you collected the sample, or the bottle is broken and leaking. So please double check that the bottles you have in your kits right now are not broken. And when you go to pack up the kit, please carefully wrap those bottles and make sure that the lid is tightened. The samples can leak out of the lids if they're not fully tightened. And like I mentioned, invalid samples, we cannot analyze them at the lab, so we'll need you to resample, and we really don't want you to have to do that. So we had a question about notifying the public water facilities if there are detections in your samples. I will notify OHA and approve the analysis results in our data management software, and if you have a detection, you'll automatically get an email with those results. I will contact facilities if any extra sampling is required. If source water or finished water have detections over the health advisory limit by Thursday or Friday of that week. I'll also email Oregon Health Authority with the results, either Thursday or Friday, and all results will be uploaded to OHA's data repository by Friday afternoon. So it will all happen within 1 week. Some of you don't use DEQ for the lab analysis, which is totally fine. We just ask that samples are analyzed by an accredited lab. The DEQ lab is accredited, and if you're not using DEQ lab and we don't already know about it, please make sure you contact me and let me know so that we don't send you extra samples and we can verify that the lab that you're sending your samples to is accredited. Water samples need to be analyzed using EPA method 546 for total microcystins analyzed by ELISA. We don't have a confirmation method for total microcystins. It's not necessary for this program. For cylindrospermopsin, there is no EPA standard method for ELISA screening, so we have our own screening method through DEQ. If you're using an outside lab and you need this protocol and you don't have it, let me know. For confirmation samples, again, those little vials that you would need to send to us or to another lab, you need to have those samples analyzed by EPA method 545, the confirmation by LC-MS-MS. If you want us to analyze any additional samples, we can do that for a fee. Some of you have intergovernmental agreements from last year with us, and those are still valid. If you are interested in having us analyze additional samples, we can go ahead and get you set up and get that paperwork in order. The cost of analysis depends on how overloaded the lab is. The OHA rule samples are our priority, and we're anticipating a potentially busy HAB season this year, but we'll analyze these additional samples as soon as we can. If you're interested in additional sampling, please let me know. And for more information, for OHA rules, regulations, facts, resources, Greg Baird is your go-to guy at OHA, and his contact information is here. If you have any questions on the lab side, sampling, analysis, any logistical issues, shipping problems, or lab results, I'm your go-to. I will mostly be in the office during the season. There may be occasional days where I'm working out of the office. My office phone and work cell are listed here, as well as my email address. And I have all of our participants on mute on your phone right now. If you have any questions, please ask them in the chat box. And again, thank you all for participating in this program. We really appreciate your work and compliance. And thank you for being here today. If you have any questions that come up after this presentation, please don't hesitate to email or call Greg or myself. We're happy to help. The season will begin on Monday, and we look forward to a great but busy season. Thank you. And Greg, just to get started, one question I've been getting from a few facilities is how long we'll need to continue with this monitoring program, how long facilities will need to keep sampling.
Sure. Yeah, so this is a permanent rule adopted by Oregon, so the monitoring is every year between May and October, going into the future.
And Greg, just to follow up on that, how can facilities that are required to sample get off of the list?
Well, that's a great question. Most of the systems are on the list for having a previous documented harmful algal bloom or a previous cyanotoxin detection. And we're working on developing some criteria for getting off the list, if on the list for that criteria. It would probably involve some new information showing that the source is no longer susceptible to harmful algal blooms or cyanotoxin detections. That leaves the other criteria, which is the 303D list for algae and aquatic weeds. We are further along on developing criteria for that. Basically, if you're interested, you can let me know and I can explain it, but it basically begins with gathering information to delist that water source for that particular 303D criteria. So if you're on the list for both of those things, previous HABs or cyanotoxin detection and the 303D list, both exemptions from both of those criteria would have to be obtained somehow.
Thanks, Greg. I see that there's a question about labeling the PETG bottles. These are the plastic bottles for qPCR. You'll label those the same way that you do the toxin samples. We have bottle labels for those as well, so you'll just fill out 2 labels and just stick them on both bottles. Thank you. Oh, and we are recording the presentation right now, and we're going to send this out to all of the participants hopefully by the end of the week. I'll also send out a PDF copy, and this recorded presentation will be up on OHA's website just as soon as we can get it up there.
Allison, one last thing. I think on your contact information slide, for my phone number, it might not be correct. My direct line is 971-673-0410. 0423 is Carrie Salas, my boss. So if you end up calling her, she'll forward it to me, but I'm 0410.
Thanks, Greg. Carrie Salas was one of the presenters last year, and I must have just copy-pasted her phone number by mistake, so thanks. In the notes, I listed Greg's direct line, so please use that phone number if you need to call him. Are there any other questions? If you have questions, please write them in the chat. Oh, we have another question, whether additional recreational samples can be collected from a source water area. Greg, do you want to answer that question?
Sure, let me see. Yeah, I mean, like Allison said, if you're interested in doing additional sampling, you can arrange to do that through the DEQ lab with a fee, and if you have an IGA. Otherwise, we're only providing sampling for systems that are not on the susceptible list to do sampling at their intake, basically if they see a bloom and their source.
Hey, thanks, Greg. I have another question that was emailed to me about how full the qPCR bottles need to be. There's no fill line on these labels, or on these bottles. There is no set volume for the sample, but our lab chemist has said that the fuller the better. So you can fill it up all the way. These aren't going to be frozen, so they're not going to expand. We're just going to filter them as soon as we receive them. So the more the better. Thanks. If there are no other questions, we're going to end this presentation. If you think of anything between now and Monday, please give me a call or an email, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you again for everybody who participated in this webinar. We really appreciate your attendance and look forward to a good season. Thank you.